Hey there, this video is for IT founders struggling to sell into large enterprises. One of the things that I heard fairly constantly when I was growing and building my IT services business was, I can't compete, or it's difficult to compete against the big Goliaths in the industry, the Tech Mahindras, the Xeroxes, the IBMs, the Microsoft consulting services. I mean, there's any number of firms that would fall into the big Goliath category. And how do you differentiate yourself? Hi there, my name's Rory McCaw. Welcome to Self-Made Strategy. I started an IT services company back in 2001 and sold it in 2018 for more than 8 figures. And I'm here to share my expertise and experiences with you so that you can avoid making those same mistakes and hopefully you can grow your business faster. So let's get into it. So I'm going to use some real world examples. I'm not going to make anything up. These are real world lived examples of customers and situations that we had, or I had, and I've dealt with in building my company and how I went about differentiating ourselves. So a couple of things before you're even in front of the client. First of all, you need to have the credibility with the technology that you're going in to talk about. So whether it's from a blog, whether it's from a YouTube channel, whether it's from speaking, say, at a Microsoft conference, whether it's from writing a book on the technology or being a presenter at a Microsoft office or at an event that maybe your organization put on, there's any number of ways to establish credibility, but having credibility is key to getting into the organization in the first place. So let me start off with, I'm not going to use the name of it because I don't think I'm allowed to based on our legal contracts. But it was a large casino operator in Las Vegas. So if you think of there's only 3 or 4 large casino operators in Vegas, we were called in. Now we were introduced by Microsoft, so that provided a great deal of credibility, but we were called in. I remember distinctly, I was at a dinner with some of my employees in the UK. We were over there working on closing a deal with a large university over there for services in our UK business. And I was called and asked to join a meeting. I hopped on the call. It was an hour call. And at the end, and we talked extensively throughout the call, the customer at the time was looking to implement the new technology, the one that we were experts in, from Microsoft. And they were looking to remove Xerox from their business. So Xerox was a huge provider. They had a contract in excess of $30 million a year. And Xerox didn't, in their mind, have the experience and expertise in the Microsoft technology, nor were they really that motivated to replace the technology that they were already working with a new Microsoft technology. So Microsoft brought us in, we had a call, we further established our credibility with the casino operator. And at the end of the call, the casino operator said, "Are you Nevada gaming certified?" And we said, no, we've never done business for a casino and had that requirement before. And then they lost their mind, literally lost their mind, started using profanity and screaming at us and saying that we've wasted an hour of their time. And once that individual had an opportunity to calm down after the call, quickly realized that there wasn't a great deal preventing us from getting the Nevada gaming certification relatively quickly. Now, like a lot of large businesses, when you get on this call and you convince them of your credibility and they start to see what you can do and the pace at which you can operate as a smaller business. So that's one of your differentiators. Your ability to work quickly is a key differentiator. So after the call, we put together a statement of work. It was very common to have a call and then put together a statement of work suggesting what it is that we can do, what the potential costs were. We wouldn't scope out the entire project. We would scope out the first phase, which was usually requirements gathering, so that we could better understand what we're getting ourselves into. We turned that statement of work around within 24 hours. That's something that customer had never experienced from a larger provider. So speed and response time were two critical elements that we leveraged in helping to differentiate ourselves. We were already differentiated because Microsoft introduced us, so we had established our credibility, which was key. So they knew that we had the expertise to deliver. Now they knew that we responded quickly. The third thing we had to get by is two things at this point. We had to get by their legal. They had a fairly significant backlog in their legal department for inbound contracts, and they had an approved vendor list that we needed to get on. Those were both bottlenecks that they had based on their processes as a business. Now, these aren't uncommon, but because they wanted to work with us, that's your lever to get them to prod their legal department to move faster in the approval of our master services agreement or professional services agreement, and the signing of the NDA prior to that to kind of get things rolling. So they already had the statement of work. They wanted to move forward. Now their own processes were preventing them from doing that. So we're trying to help them to escalate that. Now, one of the ways to do that is review their contract quickly, which we did once it was sent to us, and try to summarize and push back on all of the key areas in one email. You don't often get an opportunity to go back to them and say, oh, well, there were 5 things in the first email, but now we've caught 3 other things. They're basically going to tell you to get lost in many cases. So you have to be very diligent in reading through that contract or having your legal counsel read through it. Now, I typically read through the contracts on my own and made changes and modifications or proposals for changes without legal counsel being involved, because legal counsel typically slows things down. They're an inhibitor to getting business done in many cases, and we were too small to have in-house legal counsel, so there could be a 1 or 2 week delay. We wanted to respond quickly. I was very comfortable and familiar. Now with AI, you can run the contract through AI and ask for any biases and things you should be on the lookout for. That's something that I didn't have at my disposal back then, so I would encourage you to leverage that for sure. But once you read through that contract and get back to them on the things, for example, let me give you an example. So one of the catches that you'll find in a lot of these big corporate contracts is they'll put a clause in where it's not transferable. Well, I mentioned on an earlier video about selling your business, you want to make sure that it's transferable. Otherwise, it has very little value to somebody acquiring your business. The second thing they usually drop in is, or can drop in this case they did, and this isn't as common, but in this instance it appeared, was a most favored nations clause. So if you've been following the media with the new Trump administration, one of the things that Donald Trump has talked about with respect to prescription drug prices is that the U.S. should have a most favored nations clause, meaning that they get the lowest price that that pharmaceutical provider sells the drug at around the world, globally. So the US will pay no more than the most favored nation. And that was one of the clauses in this. So if we had a customer who, let's say, was a small business, which we didn't have a lot of, but maybe smaller in size, and maybe we gave them a price discount, they'd have the ability to audit all of our financials on an annual basis with a few days, weeks notice. It was called out in the contract, the period of time they'd be able to notify us. And then if they found that we had offered someone a discounted rate or a more cost-effective rate, they would be able to come back and ask for a reduction in what they've paid and effectively a rebate. So we crossed that one out. We're not going to go forward with a most favored nations clause. The third thing that we wanted to be aware of was an IP clause, an intellectual property clause. So one of the things that you'll find in a lot of corporate agreements is the corporation, they're sneaky. I mean, they want to win. They want to do it whatever ways possible. And most of them will, if you read the contract and push back, they'll agree to your terms. And one of those terms is that they get to own all of your intellectual property, both past and future. So anything that we did in terms of we built some software in-house, they would have had the ownership of that, and we'd have to give them the IP. Well, there's no way we were going to do that. We created our own custom training materials. There's no way they deserve to get the intellectual property for those because we were going to do work for them. They should be paying us for those if they're going to acquire them, and they should be paying us a premium on those or a multiple on those because they could take them and sell them to other customers. So we crossed that clause out. Anyway, we got to the end of the negotiation and in the legal contract, and we got that moving forward. But as that was moving forward, we'd already started to move forward on the approvals process with the Nevada Gaming Commission. So going back to one of the things customers always ask for on these calls is they get excited, you establish your credibility, they want to do business with you. They're like, can you start Monday? Well, first of all, it was a Friday. I was in the UK. It was impossible to schedule anyone to be there on a Monday. And even if we had, they would have been sitting on their hands for the better part of 3 to 4 weeks, because a large organization needs to onboard a consultant or a new hire. That onboarding, in the case of the casino operator, required the Nevada gaming license. It required they sit through copious hours, I think 4 to 6 hours of online training and take tests to get certified as a contractor or employee on their business operations and systems. And then they had to provision a notebook. We couldn't use our own equipment because it was going to be connected to their corporate network, and they had a security policy. The rigmarole and process went on and on and on. And this isn't uncommon in working with a larger organization. So normally when someone says, can you start Monday, what that really translates into, if they're willing to move fast and push their legal department and move things forward in an aggressive pace, is that you'll probably be starting in 4 to 6 weeks, which gives you ample opportunity to resource the engagement, because we didn't have, hopefully, we never wanted to have consultants sitting idle on the bench just waiting for customers to call, because we'd have to pay them salaries. That would diminish or reduce our profit margins. So we wanted to keep our consultants engaged as much as possible to maximize their delivery rates, and their performance bonuses were often tied to how much they delivered or their delivery rates on an annualized basis. So they wanted to be engaged constantly. So the request to start on a Monday is usually very unlikely. In fact, 99% of the time it's unlikely, because you don't even have a contract signed. So you've got to go through multiple steps and iterations of their own process before you can start to get people on site or even working with them remotely. Not to mention, they haven't thought about the availability of their team. If you were to start immediately, you'd be connecting to a network that you knew nothing about. You have no names of systems, no IP addresses, no any information. You don't really know what the plan is. So it's pretty ineffective to start on the following Monday from a call on Friday. So that's one example. Now, another example is a large utility in the Northeast in the US. And this was a company that, again, I think initially, this company has been renamed 2 or 3 times. Initially, an individual on the business side saw me speak at a Microsoft Tech Ed or a Microsoft Management Summit conference, likely in Vegas. And that allowed me in front of the audience to establish my credibility on the subject matter. That individual, lovely man, came up to me afterwards, presented his business card, asked if I would follow up with him, which I did. And that led to a couple of calls and a statement of work to help them to implement the technology that I was speaking on at that conference, and that as a consulting organization, we were known to be experts in. Well, when that started to transpire, he engaged his local Microsoft account executive and the Microsoft team, which was based out of Boston. And then we were familiar with that team. We'd worked with them before, and we again started to work with them from an incentives perspective. This was a large enterprise customer. They were often given or allocated monetary incentives for partners to assist with the implementation of software, because it gets them to use that software. And as soon as the customer begins to use it, it makes it more sticky and likely that the customer will renew their software agreements and include that software software in those renewals. Now, all of that from a software perspective with perpetual licenses versus SaaS licenses and the cloud model has evolved, but the concept is the same. If you buy cloud software or access to cloud platforms, Microsoft wants you to start using it immediately so that it becomes entrenched in the business operation of the customer. And that's where partners come in, because they can help to accelerate that entrenchment, if you will, or the adoption of the technology within the large enterprise. So how did we establish credibility here? This was a customer that outsourced to a number of large customers. They worked with Microsoft Consulting Services. They were a competitor of ours. We had to position ourselves against what they can do. They worked with, I believe it was Tech Mahindra and maybe a couple of others on the Indian side, with a lot of offshore resources and a few on site. So how did we establish our credibility? Well, one of the ways is by speaking at these conferences. So they saw that we, as a set of systems engineers or the actual consultants, had the expertise. The other thing that you'll find as a founder entrepreneur growing, I'll call it a small, maybe boutique consulting company, is that a lot of the bigger companies perform a bait and switch. They'll bring in some of their best people in the sales pitch, and those people might be dedicated to sales. They may be pre-sales engineers that came from a consulting background but have now pivoted into sales, and they're great at talking to the customer, convincing them of the credibility, talking about the team, talking about their process, talking about their delivery model. They get the contract signed, and then they put all in a number of, call them entry-level engineers, who don't have near the same level of expertise or knowledge on the subject matter as the person that delivered the sales pitch. And there's more of them, so the customer feels like they're getting a deal because they have more people, but they're operating slower and they require more management. So in the end, they become more cost inefficient and more costly. So it takes longer to complete the project. It's not done to the level of satisfaction or with the level of expertise that it could be done with somebody who has a better understanding of the technology and can do it faster, even though you're paying them a higher hourly rate. So that is a huge differentiator, the bait and switch and the cost model. Even though you might be charging more, which I hope you are, because we were charging rates of $200 and $250 an hour 10, 15 years ago for a consultant, when other consultants were coming in the $100, $150 an hour range, and sometimes below that. You want to make sure your rates justify your expertise, because if you can get a project done at $250 an hour in 40 hours, that's way more cost effective to the customer than paying $100 an hour and having the project go on for a month. Even though they will have paid less potentially in dollar amount, in this case they didn't, but let's say they paid less in dollar amount based on the hourly rate, they would still have had to account for the hours of their own employees that were assigned to that project, which would have also been a month or 160 hours. And then they would have had to account for the delay in getting the software implemented, which would have been 3 weeks longer than maybe what we could have done in a 1 week time frame. So there's a lot of ways to differentiate there around cost, because customers will always push back on price, but there are a number of ways to address the price issue. You just have to get down to the value conversation. And sometimes it's about moving away from an hourly rate and just looking at what's included in the scope in your statement of work, figuring out how long on average, without any customer blockers, because that's another big way to lose money on a fixed bid, is having the customer slow things down. But if you can risk mitigate and call out the factors that will lead to cost increases even on a fixed price bid due to customer delays, and you know that the project will take you, let's say ballpark 40 hours to complete, you can look at 40 hours times $250 an hour and come up with an amount, and then maybe add 20% to that as a bit of a buffer, but also work in those additional risk factors so that if the customer delays you, and I'll give you an example in just a second of how this happened to us all the time, then they're penalized financially for that so that you can bill them for more money. So one of the things that we found was we would often start our engagement engagements with an architectural design and requirements collection and architectural design session, an ADS. So that was usually 1 or 2 days of meetings, depending on the size of the company, maybe a few more days with different groups and stakeholders, and then we'd go back and we'd remotely often define or design an architecture for the technology, and then we would present that to them, we'd give them all the documentation, and the next phase would be the build out. Well, before the build out could start, this was back in the physical server and virtual server timeframe. So let's call it the early 2000s up to 2018, when people were still, and people today are still using virtual machines. So we would say to the customer, so the architectural design requires you to build out, call it 10 virtual machines. And they would often say, at least on the business side, oh, we can get those provisioned within about 45 minutes. And that's true technically, but their processes, again, often slowed that down, whereas it took, with all the approvals that were required and the talking to the networking group and the storage group and the server group and the blah, blah, blah group, it took, and maybe security, it often took 2 to 3 weeks to get a virtual machine provisioned. Not technically provisioned, but provisioned and meeting all of the company's requirements for the provisioning of that VM before it's released to production. So if you factor that in, you'll know that there's going to be a 3 to 4 week gap between when you deliver and they sign off on the architectural design that you have spec'd out and justified in a meeting, as long as that meeting requires usually an hour or two, to their technical people on why you designed it this way and how it will meet the requirements that you collected in the requirements gathering session. Then you'll know you're going to wait 3 weeks until you get servers to do the deployment. So you need to factor in, as the founder or owner, that there's going to be a gap in your resource utilization, and those folks are going to get freed up. Now, where there's an upsell opportunity here for you is if that customer wants to ensure that the same resources are on the build out phase that were on the architecture phase, then they need to pay for that 3-week window until those VMs are provisioned. So if they truly believe, which they often do, and they're misled, but they often believe that those servers can be provisioned in 1 to 5 days, then they'll likely be willing to pay your consultant to be there along that journey of 1 to 5 days. And at that time, they're often doing very, very little because there's nothing to do. They don't have access to the virtual machines, and they're effectively, in most cases, restricted from the rest of the environment. So it's not like they can pitch in and help out on patching or doing something else that the IT department's working on, or jump on another project that they have going to help accelerate that, because that's not allowed and it's outside the scope of your statement of work. So that's another reason to not allow that to happen. So differentiating yourself. One of the ways that we would do that was we would apply annually and try to win Microsoft Partner of the Year awards. And we were very successful in doing that. We won a number of awards. In Canada, there was something called the Impact Awards. In the US, with the large annual Microsoft Partner Conference, or I think they called it Worldwide Partner Conference at the time, WWPC. We were nominated as top 3 finalists and a winner in multiple categories in multiple years. So that helped us to stand out. Obviously, having myself and other IT consultants as MVPs, Microsoft MVPs, that helped in our differentiation. Another thing that helped in our differentiation was our response time. When we respond within 24 hours of an initial customer call with a statement of work, being brought in by Microsoft and having them confirm our technical credibility and establish that right out of the gate in the first meeting, that helped us to stand out. Speaking at technical conferences, writing books on the subject matter, maintaining a community website, which really was part of the reason we were MVPs, was one of the differentiators as well. So as you can see, there are a number of ways to differentiate yourself, and you need to give thought to which ones are most cost effective for you to do and that you can do in the least amount of time. So that would be what I would consider for you to take away from this video, is start giving some thought to how you currently differentiate yourself from your competition, and what else you could be doing to further differentiate your business from your competition. The more you can differentiate yourself and the more you can set yourself out as the go-to expert in your field, the more you can charge hourly for your consulting services. And that will increase the value somebody is, or the amount of money somebody is willing to pay for your business when you do decide to sell it. It will also get you in front of some of the biggest publicly traded and private companies in the world, because you'll be known as the industry expert. Good luck in growing your business. If you like these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button.